Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is February 20th, 2024, Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. And like usual, we're going to start off with our first story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. And this one is, my penchant for the unusual and the mysterious, which usually has to do with true crime, something along those lines. It's titled The Skeleton at Constant Street. On Halloween 1900, Sanitary Chief George Walker made a startling discovery while conducting a house-to-house inspection. He came upon the skeleton of a woman. It was in the rear of a vacant house at 817 Constant Street, Tampa. This neighborhood was known as the Scrub. The bones were not white and polished, such as the ones used by physicians or medical students. They were dark and a little charred, as if the flesh had been recently burned from them. Wisps of wavy, fine, reddish-brown hair still clung to the skull. It appeared the skeleton had been buried in the trash pile and disturbed by prowlers. The house was built on the plan of a store and had been unoccupied for several months. The last steady occupants had been Dr. Daniel W. Culp and an undertaker with the last name of Green. Dr. Culp had suddenly left Tampa in June of 1899 after the mysterious death of M.J. Christopher, and he could not be located in order to shed some light on the mystery. It was believed that his intimacy with Christopher would lead to evil results to himself. In other words, this is why he had to quit town quick. After the undertaker, there was a grocery store and another unnamed business. The premises adjoined one of Tampa's most notorious brothels known as Madame Hilda Raymond. A report of the discovery was made to Chief Robert of the police department and to Sheriff T.K. Spencer. Visitors came to the courthouse to view the remains, but none could identify who the bones belonged to. An examination of the skeleton confirmed the theory of foul play, since it seemed the flesh had been eaten from the bones by the use of some acid. There was also a rancid odor suggesting that death had not been that long before. It was judged he could not have been dead no more than 3 or 4 months. Dave Bradley, who lived in the area, was the only one who could offer information on the subject. He said that Green, the undertaker, had once spoken to him about a skeleton which Dr. Culp possessed, and which the doctor had left on the premises when he moved from the city. There were 2 theories held by the police. Sheriff Spencer believed the skeleton was left behind by Dr. Culp and was thrown into the yard when he left. Deputy Sheriff Jack Stevens thought the hair clinging to the skull had been pasted on as a questionable decoration and wasn't the person's original hair. They did not believe it was proof of foul play. Chief of Police Roberts believed the skeleton was that of a murder victim. He said the hair and smell of recent decomposition meant it was not left behind by Dr. Culp, and also the fact that it was stained and not polished like anatomical bones. There was no clothing found at the scene to lend a clue. Also, there was no fractures or other evidence of injury on the skeleton. There have been no mysterious disappearances of women in the city in recent times, at least none reported. Chief Walker said the trash heap had been removed and another one substituted during the 7 days prior to the discovery. He said that the alley had been thoroughly cleared of rubbish on the Monday previous. It was believed the skeleton had been burned, but no one could verify where it was burned at. Now there was a question if the rubbish heap had originated at another place and had been brought there. Despite there being evidence that the woman had not died from natural causes and her remains were burned by acid to probably disguise her identity, the investigation never went beyond the initial discovery of her bones. It also appeared to be pointedly overlooked that she was found right next to a brothel. In 1903, a 20-year-old prostitute named Mamie Foster killed herself by drinking 3 ounces of carbolic acid. When her family refused to pay for her funeral, Hilda Raymond footed the bill. Perhaps the skeleton was a woman who had died, not by her own hand, but by another's. It could have been murder, or even the result of a botched abortion. Either way, Hilda might have been a soft touch with her girls, but the last thing she needed was a law in her establishment poking around about a dead prostitute. In other words, one thing is a prostitute that dies by suicide. Another thing is when it's not clear, then she wouldn't want the law inside her whorehouse. Hilda Raymond, one of the most infamous madams in Tampa, outlived all of those involved in the short-lived investigation of the skeleton in the scrub. By 1914, she identified herself as Mrs. G. D. Bryan and had moved to Baltimore. In other words, Hilda grew older and quit Tampa, went up to Baltimore, and became Mrs. Bryan. There you go. Now, as far as that skeleton, it was probably buried, all right, in in the potter's field, and that's the end of that. There you go. And the truth is, it goes without saying, even if there was a suspicion that this woman had come to a bad end, you know, like that, the very fact, like I said, the elephant in the room, that it was next to a brothel, it's they weren't going to break their heads open over somebody, a dead prostitute. How's that? It was, first of all, it was difficult as it is, even if she wouldn't have been one. But just the fact that they just like, okay, well, no, do you know who she is? No, no. What happened? No, no. Okay, let's bury her. That's it. End of story. All right. So, next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled The Ladies of Tamworth Castle. Tamworth has many ghosts that are said to be haunting its ancient walls, but two of the most famous are the Black Lady and the White Lady. Tamworth Castle is of Norman, moat, and Bailey design with a shell keep. The present stone structure replaced the first timber tower surrounded by a palisade, which was built shortly after the Norman conquest in 1066. The land of the former Saxon burg was given to Robert the Dead Dispenser by William, and is subsequently passed through marriage into the Marmion family. Numerous additions and alterations were made to the castle by succeeding generations of owners, until the late 1890s when Marquis Townshend decided to sell the castle by auction. The Marmions held the castle for over 100 years, up to 1291, when Philip Marmion died with no heirs. In 1423, the castle passed on to Sir Thomas Ferrers of Groby. Then in 1688, the castle passed on to the Shirleys of Chartley through marriage. The Earls of Northampton then held the castle from 1715, and the Townsends of Raynham owned the castle in 1751. The castle was then purchased by the Tamworth Corporation for £3,000, and it was open to the public to visit in 1899. In other words, it became a museum. It is not surprising that Tamworth Castle is reputedly the home for many ghosts and spirits that are regularly seen or their presence felt within its walls and grounds. In 1999, Anne, an employee at the castle, claimed that not a day went by without her experiencing something she couldn't explain. Once she was called out to the castle late at night, after the wind had set off the castle alarm system. The police had been called to make sure that the castle had not been broken into. Anne waited at the reception for the engineer to come and reset the alarm. After half an hour, Anne became aware of the sound of footsteps from the room above her. Then other noises became audible. She described it to a local newspaper this way, quote, "It sounded like some of the heavy furniture in the room upstairs scraping across the floor. I wasn't immediately bothered by it all until suddenly this aura came all over me, and I instantly felt an overwhelming presence. Though most of us here at the castle feel some kind of unexplained presence almost on a daily basis, this was far different to anything before. For the first time ever, I felt as though I wasn't supposed to be in the building." End quote. Anne then ran out the front door and straight into the engineer, who seemed startled to see her. What he said next made a shiver run down her spine. Though he was expecting to be met by someone, he was shocked to see me. Puzzled, I asked why, and he said while walking up the castle path only moments before, he saw someone looking out of a window. He said he simply waved and the person stepped back into the darkness. But it wasn't me, that's for sure. I'd waited on the ground floor, and by the time he saw the image, I was running outside. When I asked him to point to the window in question, he indicated the Ferrers' room, which is the one where all the noises had come from. This was used as a curator's office, and I recently had a circular meeting table and chair brought in. Was the ghost upset because they were modern and didn't fit in with the look of the castle? June Hall, another long-standing member of staff, recalled opening up one morning with a colleague, Val Lee, and walked into the room which houses the Tamworth Story Exhibition. I was struck in the face and momentarily blinded. It felt like sand had been thrown at me. When Val came in behind me, I was bent over trying to clear my eyes and shaking my top. Then Val and me saw blue mist swirl around the room and out of the window. At least this is what this lady June Hall described. The year was 925 when Athelstane, the king of Mercia, gave his daughter Editha in marriage to Sigtryg, or Jarl of Northumbria, a Norse ruler. The marriage was meant to cement peace, since 50 years earlier the Danes had ransacked the town. The capital of Mercia was Tamworth. Editha refused to marry Jarl unless he became a Christian. History is not clear whether Sigtryg reneged on the agreement to convert or deserted Editha, but it resulted in Editha joining a convent at Polesworth. She became abbess of Tamworth and died in 960. 3 years later, the Danes invaded once more, and King Edgar of England had to rebuild Tamworth. It was then that Editha was canonized as a saint and the town's church was dedicated to her. In the years after Editha's death, Mercia failed and William the Conqueror invaded England. He granted Tamworth and its lands to Robert Despenser, who died with no male heir. It was either passed on to a daughter or a niece who married into the Marmion family. Marmion seized Editha's old convent and then returned it to the church. The reason supposedly that he became so generous is that Marmion had been hunting in Hopwas Wood. He stopped to rest, and while napping he dreamt that Editha struck him with her crozier of office, making a wound. When he woke up he was badly wounded, and as the day passed it refused to heal. He interpreted this event to indicate the nunnery was to be returned to the Benedictine nuns, who went on to build a new convent. Editha is supposed to be the Black Lady of Tamworth, and the reason for her haunting is unknown. One could question, however, if the nuns had been restored to the convent, would Saint Editha still haunt the castle? Could it be because the abbey was voluntarily surrendered by the abbess Alice Fitzherbert to the crown in 1539, under the reforms of church and state during the reign of Henry VIII? The Black Lady was once again recorded in 1949 when a team of ghost hunters carried out an overnight vigil at the castle. Just after the stroke of midnight, following noises on the staircase, a photograph was taken. When developed, the picture showed a shadowy, hooded figure descending the stairs. That same year, an unknown perpetrator slashed and punctured 4 of the 20 canvases in the art gallery. It occurred on a Sunday, and since the castle was not adequately staffed, no one saw or heard anything. The culprit was never found. The other ghost at Tamworth is the White Lady. She is said to have been captured and locked in the tower by the wicked Sir Tarquin, but after a while she fell in love with him and is said to walk the battlements around the castle, weeping over her lover who was slain by Sir Lancelot du Lac, who came to rescue her. Legend has it that the White Lady threw herself from the battlements when she found that Sir Tarquin was dead. Her ghost had been seen walking the battlements and on the Warwickshire moors within sight of the castle. This tale is included in the Arthurian legends rewritten in the Middle Ages, but does not mention the site of Tarquin's castle, where Sir Gawain and other knights had been held captive until they were freed by Lancelot. So, bottom line, this place has a lot of history. Okay, well over 1,000 years. So it's seen a lot of things go on. So that there's a Black Lady and a White Lady and God knows how many other things. But that experience that the lady had where she runs into the engineer and she's hearing this scraping from above. I understand now maybe why the place is a little bit understaffed, kind of deal. Okay, let's go to, I think this was really cute. This is out of KOCO News 5. This is titled Legend of Thundercow. Residents near Lake Thunderbird describe mysterious encounter with the animal. Check it out. Over the past year, people near Lake Thunderbird have had mysterious encounters of the bovine kind, a cow that showed up in Oklahomans' yards and can't be caught. All right. A cow seen wandering near Lake Thunderbird has been dubbed Thundercow by residents, becoming a social media sensation. I believe she's real, said Jessica Kelly, a former teacher at a school in the area. Over the past year, people near Lake Thunderbird have had mysterious encounters of the bovine kind. Not only were there hoof prints, but she left a nice little cow patty behind, said Natalie Bevel, a nearby resident. The not-so-urban legend has been seen by many in the area, earning a nickname. She hangs out around Lake Thunderbird, so that's how she got her name, Thundercow. One woman said she met the cow in January. She just sort of popped out of nowhere. It startled me because it's a loose cow and it's pitch black outside. Bevel said, I was like, You know what? I can post on the neighborhood Facebook page just to kind of put out an alert. And when I did that, that's when I started getting post after post after post in response telling me, oh, hey, that's just Thundercow. Locals have no beef with the cow, and some even called the animal the mascot of Alameda. One person who saw the post wondered if the cow was still out there. With each new post, the animal becomes even more mystical. Many have tried, but no one can get her, Kelly said. She travels in the dark, so nobody can get her. Is this Norman's very own Bigfoot, or does the cow have an owner? It's unclear for now, but locals said she can often be spotted grazing on the shores of Lake Thunderbird during the day. She's out there, Kelly said. Since Bevel's encounter, Thundercow hasn't hoofed it back yet, but she said she had heard from others who have seen her in their yards. The legend of Thundercow continues to grow. And this is well, there was a short video. Let me see if, so that of, let's see, of what she looks like. But I can tell you, running, there, there she is. Okay, well, that's what I just said. But for those of you watching the video version of this, you can tell she's a big black cow. And sure enough, you see her grazing on the shores of the lake. I think that's so cute. It's like there's this weird, unusual cow. All right, called Thunder Cow. Anyway, let's go back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. This is titled The Haunted Hangar. The RAF Museum at Cosford houses hundreds of aircraft, but there is one craft, an Avro Lincoln RF 398, which is said to be haunted by a pilot that was killed in a crash. The Avro Lincoln bomber, serial number RF 398, flew out the first time on September 1945 to serve with the Royal Air Force. Too late to participate in World War II, it was used in the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya and the Malayan emergency during the 1950s. It saw service in Britain, Malta, Gibraltar, Tripoli, and Idris before being retired. It was flown on April 30th, 1963 for storage at a future RAF museum. In 1965, the RF 398 had been adopted by the Air Historical Branch of the MOD. It was moved to RAF Cosford for storage in the late summer of 1968. It didn't get much attention until the body of a Polish pilot was recovered from a nearby peat bog in 1987. During the Second World War, thousands of exiles from German-occupied Poland were keen to join the RAF and to fight back against the common enemy. Others say that when the pilot was buried in consecrated ground in November of 1987, after his remains were recovered, the sightings of a mysterious airman known as Lindholm Willie at RAF Lindholm ceased. Others tie the beginning of weird events to a Spitfire, which was brought to the hangar around the same time. In 1979, a local newspaper sent a photographer to get a picture of three volunteers who were working on the wreck, along with the story of the World War II planes at the museum. When the photograph was developed, there was a fourth figure in the group. No one could account for who this was. By the way, the wreck they're talking about is the Spitfire. Of the engineers working on the plane, one of the engineers working on the planes saw a figure coming towards them, and then disappeared as he turned towards it. The other man was in the cockpit and didn't witness the apparition. There were no other persons working in the hangar at the time. The next day, both engineers found parts underneath the plane which had not been there before. They were more mystified than before since they were the last to leave the building and the first to arrive. The BBC heard of the story and they sent reporter Maureen Carter to cover the haunted plane. By then, over 24 ghostly experiences were reported around the hangar. The camera crew discovered what they filmed only after they returned to their offices. Next to Maureen Carter, who sat in the bomber's cockpit, was a ghostly image. She didn't see anything when the photograph was taken. Another sighting took place in 1980 when a staff member saw a figure moving in the shadows by the plane. He switched on the light and searched everywhere, but found nothing. Once the lights were off, a cloudy thing appeared. That same week, a mechanic working on the plane felt around for a piece of equipment that had fallen and was shocked when it was handed to him, even though he was working alone. The same year, a visitor said he saw a fair-haired man in a white polo neck sweater under battle dress and a forage cap, sitting in the cockpit of the plane. As time passed, more persons described seeing an airman in battle dress in the hangar. Others have seen someone wearing a flying helmet in the observation dome of the aircraft. The ghost likes to make its presence known by moving objects and affecting the temperature. There has been the sound of footsteps around the plane. In 1984, the ghost was seen by a cameraman working with a program Wish You Were Here. The secretary to the Museum Society heard her name being called. She looked for a live person and found no one. After this, she refused to enter the hangar alone. An electrician who took a 15-foot tumble from the hangar insisted instead of hitting the concrete floor, felt his descent stop. He felt he floated instead of hitting the pavement hard. In 1987, the Chesterfield Paranormal Research Group investigated the hangar. They left a tape recorder in the plane and made sure no one was in the building. When they returned, the lid of the machine was lifted and 2 reels were removed and spread about the cockpit. During the next 4 years, at least 20 recordings were taken around the RF-398, which included muffled voices, droning engines, tappings, and rappings. In 1991, the BBC produced a show titled Strange Stories, The Haunting of RF-398. They were able to record some of the strange noises others had heard in the hangar. Afterward, the museum declined the request for investigating the hangar. The identity of the ghost remains as much a mystery as it has always been. Some say it is Master Pilot Hiller who loved the aircraft and said on his last flight that he would haunt his baby. He did not foresee that he would die in 1963 in an airplane crash. Who is the ghostly airman? This is a story that might shed some light on that question. It was excerpted from the book Military Ghosts by Alan C. Wood. Quote, RAF Lindholm, 7 miles east-northeast of Doncaster, began life in 1930-1940 as a No. 5 group bomber airfield with 2 runways and 36 hard standings. It was only 20 feet above sea level when Lindholm Lake 3 miles east and marsh bogs at the end of 1 runway. The last RAF usage was in 1978. At present, it is HM Prison Lindholm. On July 20th, 1941, number 305, Polish Wielkopolski Squadron moved into RAF Lindholm and equipped with Vickers Wellington 1C aircraft. The squadron commenced night bombing raids into the Ruhr Valley of Germany, which continued until August 1943, when it transferred to day bombing. After a bombing raid over Cologne, a Wellington overshot runway 232 and sank out of sight in the peat bog. None of the aircrew were found. Second World War legend has it that a badly damaged Polish-piloted Wellington bomber, returning one night from bombing Germany, had a badly wounded sergeant pilot who ordered his crew to bail out while he attempted to land the stricken bomber. The aircrew bailed out, leaving the pilot alone. The Wellington aircraft came down in Lindholm Bog and disappeared beneath the surface. 3 weeks or so later, the station padre was on the airfield that night when he saw a blood-stained figure in Second World War flying clothing approaching. The figure said, "Sir, can you direct me to the sergeant's mess?" in a strong Polish accent. The padre pointed to the nearby sergeant's mess, and the figure walked away into the darkness before the padre could offer assistance. The wounded sergeant pilot was seen by others at Lindholm Airfield, and on one occasion spoke to the station commander group captain asking for the same question. As the figure disappeared, the group captain ordered a search of the area, but nothing was found. The Second World War ended, but on numerous occasions the ghostly wounded sergeant pilot kept appearing at Lindholm, still asking the same question, and always disappearing. He came to be known as Lindholm Willie. One version of the legend has it that the bomber crashed into the bog, killing all but the wounded pilot, who managed to stagger from the aircraft in the bog and die on the doorstep of the sergeant's mess. Other legends abound about how the Lindholm ghostly airmen. One has it that there's a Hampton light bomber still down in the bog with a dead aircrew aboard. Handley Page Hampton's aircraft of 50 Squadron were based at Lindholm and took place on the first RAF bombing raid on Berlin on the night of August 25, 26, 1940. In 1975, Fisson's Fertilizer Company dredged Lindholm Bog, known as Hatfield Waste for peat, and found the wreckage of a crashed Wellington, identified from its geodetic construction. In the cockpit were 4 unidentifiable human remains. a Wellington aircraft carried 5 aircrew. On July 23, 1987, a Fitzons workman digging for peat found the peat-preserved body of a Polish airman, which bore injuries consistent in falling from an aircraft at a height. The airman's body could not be identified. He was buried on November 11, 1987 at RAF Finningley. End quote. The airman, recovered during the summer of 1987, was interred in November at Holy Trinity and St. Oswald, Finningley Churchyard at row 6, plot 1, with a service held by an RAF chaplain. There were no dog tags or other means of identification, so he was buried with a known to God headstone. This is another story from 2016 about a person who blogged about the following encounter. Quote, I was employed at RAF Lindholm in 1968-69 with MPBW as a works plumber. The works complex was located at the far end of the camp, away from the living quarters. The time of year was probably November. As I was making my way back along the road, which was poorly lit, I observed a figure in flying jacket and boots cross in front of me about 100 yards in front. The weather was foggy and it was dark apart from the poor lamps. The figure came from the airfield and made its way to an equipment store that supplied flying jackets to the trainee flying cadets that used the Chipmunk trainer. I thought nothing of this incident until I was well past this point, but being curious as to why anyone should be flying in this weather, turned around and went back to the store to ask who had come in wearing wartime flying gear, only to be informed that no one had come in the store in the last 4 hours, as the weather was too bad. So was this Lindholm Welly? I had observed. I always like to think so. End quote. These are other accounts. There's another account from 2018. Quote, 1972. Cadets from my Air Training Corps squadron visited Lindholm for annual camp. The airfield was preparing to be closed and its aircraft transferred, but there was a Victor undergoing some major maintenance, and it was still in one of the hangars. 1973. Little did I realize in 1965 that just 8 years later, I would be detached to Lindholm for area radar training as part of my air traffic control officer course, but I was. The unit, now called Northern Radar, had civil controllers working alongside the RAF ones, each operating their own traffic in the same airspace. Lindholm Willie. I lived in the officers' mess during my detachment. One evening, I was walking from the TV room to the bar along a corridor which passed the snooker room. The door to this was ajar. There was a light showing, and I could hear the balls clicking as if someone was playing. As occasionally one of us civil or military controllers might slip in there for a solo knockabout, I poked my head around the door to see who it was. The room was empty. No other doors, windows closed, a ball still rolling across the table. I could feel a double whiskey beckoning at this point, so I continued my walk to the bar, where I told the others in there about this. Some confessed having similar experiences, including a Singapore Air Force officer who was on a course at the bombing school and had never heard about Lindholm Willie. One of the RAF guys then told a great story. Back in the days when the runway caravan was the tow type rather than being self-propelled, they had finished flying for the day due to deteriorating weather. The guy in the caravan was waiting for a towing vehicle to come and pick him up, and suddenly there was a knock on the door. Now the airman hadn't seen any vehicle drive up, and on looking out the glass house, all he saw near the door area was a white, shapeless object, so presumably thinking Lindholm Willie was paying him a visit, he did the only logical thing, crashed open the door and legged it across the airfield, which rather surprised the person outside. He was a USAF F-100 pilot who had been unable to land close by due to the weather, had run short of fuel and ejected, and happened to land on Lindholm Airfield. He had then gathered up his billowing white parachute and walked towards the only light he could see, that on the runway caravan. On arrival in the usual courteous American way, he had knocked on the door before entering. You know the rest. End quote. Perhaps the ghostly airman is one whose body is yet to be discovered, buried in the bog or in a wreckage of his plane. All right. As you could tell, the one that was discovered in 1987 and buried, he wasn't even in a plane. And then you have the other ones that were found inside the plane. And again, like they're saying, who knows if there's anybody else? Is Lindholm Willie or are the other ones tied at, as a matter of fact, to the one of the museum pieces that happens a lot with museums, not only aircraft museums, but they'll get pieces that just they got stuff that attach them. So maybe that's what's going on there. Anyway, let's go on to the next one. This is out of Daily Mail, and it's titled "World's Biggest Snake is Discovered in the Amazon Rainforest." Okay. If you're not a fan of snakes, look away now. The world's largest snake has been discovered in the Amazon rainforest, and at 26 feet long and weighing 440 pounds, it's an absolute whopper. The northern green anaconda was found by TV wildlife presenter Professor Freek Vonk. It's as thick as a car tire. Despite having a head the size of a human's, it seems Professor Vonk 40 wasn't scared of getting up close and personal with a snake. Okay. Incredible footage shows the Dutch biologist swimming next to the enormous anaconda. That thing is huge. Until now, only one species of green anaconda, also called the giant anaconda, have been recognized in the Amazon. However, the northern green anaconda has been confirmed as a distinct species in a new study published in Diversity in this month. Together with 14 other scientists from 9 countries, we discovered that the largest snake species in the world, the green anaconda, Professor Vonk said. As we all know, if from movies and stories about giant snakes, are actually 2 different species. The green anaconda, found in the north of the range in South America, including Venezuela, Suriname, and French Guiana, appear to belong to a completely different species. Although they look almost identical at first glance, the genetic difference between the two is 5.5%, and that is huge. To put this in perspective, humans and chimpanzees are only genetically different from each other only by 2%. The researchers have given the new species the Latin name, Eunochetes acayima, I hope I'm saying that right, which means the northern green anaconda. Despite only just being discovered, the researchers say that the new species is already under threat. Professor Vonk explained the Amazon region is under severe pressure from continued deforestation. Over a fifth of the Amazon has already disappeared, which is more than 30 times the area of the Netherlands. The survival of these iconic giant snakes is inextricably linked to protecting their natural habitat. Professor Jesus Rivas, the lead author of the study, explained that he first realized it was more than one species of green anaconda over 15 years ago. Along with his wife, Dr. Sarah Corey Rivas, they started to analyze samples to look for genetic differences. However, it took until now to publish their findings. Professor Rivas said, Sarah and I started working on this in 2007 when we first noticed there was a big genetic difference between the Venezuelan samples and some samples from Peru. That is one big snake. Holding another snake was the author of that. Then we started the process of gathering samples and collaborators throughout South America and beyond to complete the mosaic of samples that allowed us to put the study together. I worked across the countries with various colleagues to gather the samples, and Sarah did most of the heavy lifting, sequencing genes and doing the phylogenetic analysis. This was truly an international project. Looking at the list of authors, there's one from Belgium, one from Australia, one from the Netherlands, etc., etc. All right, but you know what? Look at, is that what that is? What is it eating? Okay. Eugenics has been in the river after eating a capybara. Okay. I've got the solution for this. They don't have to worry about. All they have to do is drop off a couple of the snakes over in the Florida Everglades, and I know because I'm from South Florida, and it will multiply. There's a right now because of the Everglades, the climate and the habitat is so similar that they grow exponentially. As a matter of fact, now they're considered an invasive species in the Everglades. All they have to do, if they're worried about the numbers, drop off a couple, come back in about 5 years, and you'll have all the northern green anacondas you want. Believe me. And you don't know how many people have found weird stuff that's been eating animals, and they find them under the houses and stuff like that. And most of the time, usually the nexus of this, whether they were pythons or things that people buy in pet shops, is that they become large, they grow, especially when you feed them. And some people, instead of, they just take them out in the Everglades when they can't handle them anymore, they don't want them anymore. Irresponsible people, and they let them go. And believe me, that's all they have to do. Drop them off in the Everglades. All right. Going back to stranger than fiction stories, this is titled The Missing Mr. Todd. A man was found 9 years after he disappeared. It made the papers in Daytona. However, the one question never asked is what happened to him. James S. Todd was 23 years old when he was discharged from the Union Army for disability in 1863. He had served in the 1st Regiment Ohio Infantry Company E as a hospital steward. In the late 1870s, he came to Florida in the company of a Mr. Cleppinger and settled in the area that would eventually become Daytona. He occupied a log cabin in Block 20 of what 20 years later would be Ridgewood Avenue. He stayed for about 18 months, returned to Ohio, but came back in 1886. He was known as a well-educated man from a good family, his uncle being the war governor of Ohio. His one weakness was a love of strong drink. Some would say this was his undoing when he went on a bender for a few days in 1892. He left Daytona and went south, last being seen at Fowler's Point. A few days after he disappeared, search parties went out for him and tracked him to the shore of Strickland Bay near Spruce Creek. From there, no further clue was found of where he headed to. The fate of Mr. Todd seemed destined to remain a mystery until February 26, 1901, when Mr. Baker, who lived on Turnbull Bay in Spruce Creek, was out hunting hog and came across a human skeleton on a low island in the marshes. Acting as a guide, he brought Charles R. Cox and Oscar Michael to where he found the bones. There was strong evidence, even after 9 years, to confirm the identity of the remains. First, his gold-filled teeth, his open-faced watch pinned under the body, the truss he was known to wear, a big graphite pencil he used, and his nose glasses with a tortoiseshell frame were found with the remains. The underjaw was several feet away and some of the limbs were scattered, possibly rooted around by hogs. He carried a bunch of keys on a ring. The iron ones had been mostly consumed except for a brass one. His sister Sally Hook had the remains shipped to Ohio where he was interred with the rest of his family. What became of his partner Kleppinger is unknown. Strangely, there was no questioning as to what had happened to Todd. There was no mention if he committed suicide, was murdered, or simply got lost. Was it a lack of curiosity? Or what's that saying about letting sleeping dogs lie? See what I mean? Sometimes the lack thereof. You know when you hear about does protest too loudly? Well, the opposite also holds true. When there is no protest at all, that kind of sometimes points to weird stuff going on. All right. Then we're going back to, next story is out of the Daily Mail. This is very cute. This is a baby, okay. A baby gorilla is born at a Texas zoo via a rare emergency C-section. All right. Human doctors stepped in to perform a rare emergency C-section on a gorilla after she went into labor 5 weeks early. Pregnant mom Sakani showed signs of preeclampsia identical to human mothers, holding her head as if she had an extreme headache. Zookeepers at Fort Worth Zoo, Texas, called in a team of gynecologists who usually spend their time looking after pregnant women to assist with the urgent delivery. Alongside vets, they performed a rare emergency C-section birth 5 weeks early, saving the life of the mom and baby gorilla, now called Jamila. This was on January 5th. Doctors used to caring for premature babies were hard to resuscitate the little one, just like they would for babies born early. And photos show the little gorilla being looked after in settings near identical to a human baby. Following the birth, Sekani has struggled to bond and care for the female newborn, which is being given round-the-clock care by zookeepers. Experts hoping another female gorilla, Gracie, may be a possible surrogate for the baby. It is the third gorilla birth in the zoo's 115-year history, but the first gorilla to be born via cesarean section. Dr. Jamie Walker Irwin led the surgery with neonatologist Dr. Robert Ersprung and Dr. Dennis Occhiogrosso, all more used to human patients than animal ones. The baby was named Jamila in part after Jamie. Dr. Irwin said, taking part in delivering Sekani's infant via cesarean section was one of the highlights of my entire career as an OBGYN, I'll say. It's an honor and privilege to assist with care for this endangered species and to share my expertise with the veterinary staff at the Fort Worth Zoo. I was amazed at how Sekani's anatomy matched that of my human patients. The infant required immediate intervention, and Dr. Ersprung assisted the Fort Worth Zoo team with resuscitation and stabilization, respiratory support, and radiographs. It was incredible how similar this mother-infant pair was compared to what I see in the hospital for babies born under similar circumstances, said Dr. Ersprung. The baby needed critical respiratory support for a few hours post-delivery, but as she transitioned to life outside the womb, she stabilized quite nicely. She has so many features typical of a slightly premature human baby. The zoo's care team was incredible. Their ability to adapt to the care needs of a medically fragile infant was amazing to watch. Fort Worth Zoo primate keepers, along with veterinary nutrition staff, began round-the-clock care and feeding of the little gorilla while Sekani recovered. Despite repeated attempts to reunite the mother and baby, Sekani showed little interest in caring for her baby, they said. Zoo experts suspect Sekani never experienced the necessary hormonal cues that come during the natural and full-term birth. After 2 weeks and several unsuccessful unification attempts, staff started to train 24-year-old female gorilla Gracie to become a surrogate mother. Gracie has two offsprings of her own, including 1-year-old Bruno, and is already trained to present her baby up to keepers for a visual examination. All right, let me see. Jamila's birth also delighted animal lovers across social media, with many flocking to the zoo's Instagram this week. All right, let me see if I can get, as part of the presentation is of the birth. It was really neat, the video. Let's see if I can get, has no, let's see. All right. Okay, because part of this could not be loaded either because the server, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. And for those of you, I'm just showing this real quick. Let me tell you something. They got that gorilla intubated for the C-section. They did it just like a regular C-section. That's incredible. Wow. Okay. But I don't know. Let me tell you something. They're all cute, but man, when they grow up, they're very powerful animals. For those of you watching the podcast version of this, see, because not all of them bond. They're showing a different mother thing. Hold on, let me see if I can get the one for this one for let me see real quick. All right, okay. Anyway, forget it. It's if you look it up, it's really it's very nice, because let's face it, they probably, if it's preeclampsia, both the gorilla, the mom, and the baby could have died. Let's go back to Stranger Than Fiction Stories. And this one's titled The Bones at Ponce Park. While cottages were found under the live oaks at Ponce Park, which was known for being the haven of women with children and anglers who came to fish, this normally placid place was stirred up when 7 skeletons were discovered by Postmaster Frank Stone when he dug up his back lot. This was in February of 1915 in Daytona at a place called Ponce Park. Stone had been grubbing some palmetto, live oak, and bay bushes near the east line of his property and along the road leading south to the Ponce de Leon Inlet Lighthouse. He broke the skull with his hoe, and once he realized it was a cranium, he began a careful excavation. The entire skeleton was unearthed, and he kept digging and finally exhumed 7 skeletons. Captain B.J. Pachetti thought they may have been the crew of a wrecked sailing vessel who were massacred by Indians. Others believed they were the unfortunate members of Dr. Turnbull's colony. In 1764, the British Parliament set aside £500, British pounds sterling, as a bounty for cultivating silk, cotton, and indigo in East Florida, and authorized generous land grants for citizens who volunteered to travel and develop these industries. Dr. Andrew Turnbull, a Scottish physician, convinced several of his wealthy British friends to start the new colony. His plans were to employ Greeks from Asia Minor as laborers, since they were accustomed to a warmer climate. At this time, conditions were difficult for the Greeks due to living under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. Turnbull was knowledgeable in this area since he had spent several years as a consul in the Ottoman Empire and married a Greek woman named Maria Gracia Durobin at Smyrna in Greece. 20,000 acres were granted for the colony, and Turnbull traveled south from St. Augustine until he came to Mosquito Inlet, where he found an attractive tract of land dotted with magnolia, live oaks, and bay trees. He named the new site New Smyrna. The Ottomans resisted his attempt to hire the Greeks, and he returned with about 1,500 workers, most of them Minorcans. Minorca is one of the Balearic Islands located in the Mediterranean Sea belonging to Spain. These were indentured servants who, once they finished their indenture, would be given a plot of land in East Florida or be given passage to return home. By the end of the summer in 1768, New Smyrna was settled. The work was difficult, and a number of workers died from disease or met violent death at the hands of the Indians. Turnbull's relationship with his laborers deteriorated as the years went by on account of poor working conditions and the harsh practices of his overseers. In 1777, the laborers marched northward to St. Augustine to complain to Governor Patrick Tonin, who provided them with shelter. Were these their remains? A third version of their identity was that they were killed during the Civil War, as a number of skirmishes took place in the vicinity of the inlet. When the road was graded through from river to the ocean 15 years before, a 24-pound cannonball was dug up in the grading, which had been dropped by a Union gunboat. Charles W. Jones, one of the oldest citizens in the town, had once cleared a tract of land where he lived and found a human skeleton. Along with it was a flintlock pistol, a small daguerreotype, picture frame, and some brass buttons. Some believe these bones were older than the ones Jones found. However, there were no clues around them to help in identifying them. They belonged to mature men of average build. The only thing found was a half-buried coral rock that weighed about 10 pounds. Perhaps this had been a marker. The skeletons were under twin live oaks. The rock was about 3 feet south of the tree, further south, and within 1 foot of the nearest skull. Whether by design or not, the twin oaks stood a step apart, north and south, and another step would bring you to the coral rock, and a foot further was the nearest body. There was evidence of foul play, and the bodies were piled on each other, as many of the bones of the arms and legs lay crisscrossed, and the skulls of several were in such proximity to indicate a hasty burial or indifference when disposing of the dead. Some of the skulls were whole even to the lower jaw, with many of the teeth, and others were cracked and eroded. The remains were only a few inches below the surface, and the roots of a nearby tree and bushes had grown into the skulls through the openings of the eye sockets and nostrils. Captain Pachetti was sure his father, Captain Bartoli Pachetti, had never mentioned any massacre, and he had come to the area in 1843. There was a massacre of shipwrecked people by the Indians south of the inlet shortly after he arrived. Once the Indians left towards the west, Captain Pachetti and the others buried the victims of the massacre. The land in this area had its secrets and memories long forgotten. There was a shell mound on the land now owned by Theodore Rhodes, which was surrounded by beautiful citrus groves, and bore evidence of having been used as an ancient fort. It had a commanding view and range of the Halifax River. Grandma Sheldon, who died of old age at New Smyrna a few years before, told of a place where she played as a girl under the centuries-old live oaks. The tree had grown on an old shell mound that came up to her doorstep, and several feet beneath its shells were buried concrete steps and masonry, undoubtedly the work of a people who lived there long ago. Ultimately, it was decided that these were the remains of those massacred by the Indians, and any possibility of knowing who they were had long since disintegrated. They were reburied in an anonymous grave in a potter's field. And there you go. Foul play. Sometimes, maybe who knows. And by the way, I know that I have a couple of live oaks on my property, about 500 or 600 years old, and yeah, they're very picturesque. But if this had been buried around there and they had buried into it, they might have been there a very, very long time. So anyway, I hope you like this last version of Eerie News, and I will be back with you guys soon with some more weird news. And until then, take care.